Hi, I'm Alyson Stanfield with Art Biz Success. Welcome to a new edition of the Art Biz. In this episode, I talk with artist Megan Wimberley. She wanted to talk about rejection and how we artists do or do not do well with rejection. So she's worked at this angle from both sides. She's an artist, but she's also an administrator and head of an organization that works with artists. She has this framework for dealing with rejection for herself and with the artists in her community, the Cowgirl Artists of America. This framework involves emotional intelligence, mindfulness. It is very focused on the utmost professionalism and guarding your reputation. Here's my conversation with Megan Wimberley, who wants to help you deal better with rejection. Hi, Megan. Welcome to the Art Biz.
Hi, Alyson. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. You not only have a thriving art practice and business, but you also, for some reason, started an organization. You started Cowgirl Artists of America. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Cowgirl Artists of America is an organization working to increase opportunities and representation for female Western artists and makers. We do that through community, education, collaboration, and promotion.
And why did you feel the need to do this?
Yeah, so
It's another
so
job.
yeah,
It's a whole other job.
it is. It is an entire job. I always knew this, but there was an art show I went to that visually it really hit me hard that the amount of females represented in major shows is significantly less. And as I walked around and saw male artist after male artist and thought, where are all these talented women that I know about? Why aren't they here? And that's a complex issue that's very multifaceted, but I wanted to do something about it. And so I sat on that idea for a couple of years. And then during the pandemic, I checked the stats again and they were still very similar. And I just had the time, like many of us did during the pandemic, and just started it and it took off. So it's been an exciting and adventurous journey with lots of learning.
Do you find it difficult to balance your art, your own art, with running an organization?
It's incredibly challenging, especially at the beginning. I think I'm finally starting to make gains on having more balance and learning what things I can cut out and how to stay focused better. So I'm excited that I'm painting a lot more again because for a couple of years, my work was significantly reduced.
Yeah, yeah. And so, as part of Cowgirl Artists of America, you run exhibitions. What's your exhibition program like for artists?
Yeah, so we have a quick draw that we've done 3 years in a row. We have a show in Fort Worth we've done 3 years in a row. We've got this new show, Women's Work, which is going to be our major show each year. First year this year at the A.R. Mitchell Museum of Western Art. And then we periodically work with other people. So we're working with the Two Box Center of the Art to put on a show this year. In a couple years, we're going to be working with the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum to put on a show. So it kind of comes with who wants to collaborate with us and if it feels like it's going to be a really good fit for everyone, because we want to not only offer benefit to our artists but also to anybody we partner with.
Is it mostly up to you where those exhibitions occur, or do you have board members and other members who help contribute to that?
We do have an advisory board and also an operation board, and they help to advise and make suggestions or like, you know, just help with like being wise about our decisions. So it usually comes through me, and then if I feel like it might be a good fit, I present it to them.
Okay. Okay. So what's the exhibition process like? Is it juried?
Yeah, all of our exhibitions are juried, and we also have two membership tiers that are juried as well. So we do have a lot of opportunities for artists to go through a jury process. And typically that's 1 to 5 jurors, depending on the exhibition. And they go through that. Our selection process, the intensity, I would say, of it depends on the show. For like women's work and signature member, there are really high standards to meet. For pro membership, it's a little lower. And for some of our shows that are more geared to help emerging artists as well, the I can't think of that word, but like the barrier for entry is a little lower.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so you have how many members do you have?
Around 320, I think.
Okay. And so not everyone gets into everything that they apply for, presumably. And so you have a lot of members dealing with rejection inside of the organization, but also in their careers outside of Cowgirl Artists. So you wanted to talk about rejection, which is
Yeah.
a sticky topic. And I know a lot of people will be appreciative of this conversation. You want to talk particularly about dealing with rejection. If you don't mind, I'm going to read what you wrote to me. You said, I see some talented artists stop making work because they struggled so much with a rejection. Running Cowgirl Artists of America, I see the back end a lot, and it's so incredibly insightful to see how different jurors can see different things and how a variety of things can go into a rejection. So, where should we begin?
Well, I think one thing that I want to point out is that if you have a rejection, you are in good company because we all experience it. If you're out there hustling, whether it's trying to make sales or get into shows or juried tiers, you're going to experience rejection. And so that is a part of the process. And if you are struggling with dealing with that, you need to figure out how to get over it because otherwise you're not going to have a long-term career. And so the very first opportunity we had that was juried, it was really tragic to me. First of all, we approach it kind of this egotistical thing as the artist, like, oh, it's all about me and my work. And really, that's only one small component of it. And there's so much going in on the back end. And people sending rejection letters. Like when I sent those first rejection letters, I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a terrible feeling to send rejections to artists. And then to actually see that some of those artists did, in fact, like stop making work because it hurt them so bad. And I never want that to happen. And because it is just as commonplace as it is to breathe when you're an artist, we've got to figure out how to deal with that and not let it hold us back.
That's a really good point. I love that you said you're in good company and that it's part of the process. I think that if artists aren't getting rejected, that they're not stretching themselves enough. I had a client once who would brag that she got into every show that she got into, and I was like, "Yeah, that's probably not a good thing. You need to enter some not so safe shows and stretch your muscles a little bit."
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I love that you have that perspective. And I mean, you're on both sides because you've been rejected for your art. You have to reject other people. So, how do you encourage people to deal with rejection?
Yeah, so there's several things that I encourage people to do, and part of that is it doesn't feel good to get rejections. Like even if you are a season like a artist who's been around for a long time, you're still going to have rejections that come in that hurt, even if most of them don't. Like some of them are just disappointing. And so I think being like developing some emotional intelligence and awareness for how we're feeling when that first comes in is hugely important because what I also see besides the back end is I see all these ways in which artists respond to this and many of the things that can be really big pitfalls with professionalism responding to rejection comes out of this place of ego, of lack of understanding, and of just like letting that initial emotional response run away with you. And so reminding yourself, I am a professional. I need to handle this professionally. What do I need to do to take care of myself in this moment? And so some of those things are mindfulness exercises like breathing, taking a deep breath, calling your friend or your sister, going for a walk, and giving yourself a little bit of space to really process the way you're feeling and then develop a way to turn that into a learning opportunity. Go back and look at your application. Is there something that you could have improved? But every time that we face something challenging, it can always be an opportunity for growth. So there's success and there's learning. Like if you can develop that mindset, then you're going to be able to turn these things that feel bad into something that can make you better long term.
There's a whole lot there that you just went over, a whole lot to unpack. And I want to start with what you first said, and was to develop emotional intelligence. And then you went right into mindfulness, but can we go back to the emotional intelligence? What do you mean by that? And what are the steps that we can take to do that?
Yeah, so I can say things that have worked for me, but things that work for people vary. But some things that have really helped me is to stop and identify what it is I'm feeling. So, and actually, like, literally say, I am feeling disappointed. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling angry. Like, you can say whatever emotion it is you're feeling, because when we name it, it's this weird little thing in our brain. It takes a little bit of that sting and that power away. I don't know why, but it works. The second thing is, with like understanding those emotions, to remind ourselves that our emotions aren't who we are. They're something we're experiencing. And so being able to sit with an emotion and not let it steer your ship is really valuable. And I think that that's really what developing that emotional intelligence is for yourself, and being able to extend that emotional intelligence to anybody you're dealing with. So we'll talk about this later, but sending an angry email, for example, because you got a rejection, that does not exhibit emotional intelligence toward yourself or to that person that you're sending that to. So the recognition of, we are emotional beings. We have these hormones and chemicals coursing through our bodies that initiate specific feelings in us. And how do we develop an attitude of awareness and curiosity, and then the wisdom to take a moment to sit with it, let it calm, let it settle, and then come back to it with more wisdom and from a place of groundedness instead of this emotional rattling.
Yeah, I think that's really important to acknowledge it, to take time out to name it and say, this is how I'm feeling, rather than trying to power through it, power
Mhm.
on. You said our emotions aren't who we are. But I think the reason that being rejected for your art hurts so much is because it's so personal. And so, is our art who we are? And is it possible to divorce your work, your art, from who you are as a person? I find that very difficult.
Yeah, I think if we want to be professional and we want to get better, then yes, we need to learn how to separate ourselves from that. And any artist who has been doing it for a while can look back at work they did earlier on that they thought was fabulous, and they're like, whoa, And so I always encourage people in everything we do to approach it with a sense of humility, because one of the biggest lessons I've learned is you don't know what you don't know. And what that means is that you can't even imagine what you don't know yet. So if you're looking at your piece and you're like, this is fantastic, it is the best thing I've ever done, it should be in museums, like, yes, you might feel like that right now. In 2 years, you might look back and be embarrassed by it. And finding the balance between embracing our work wherever we are and having that confidence to be where we are, but also the eye to, I don't know what I don't know yet, and I want to grow and get better, it's so important. Honestly, it's one of the hardest jobs
Mhm.
for artists, I think, because it takes both humility and an incredible amount of confidence. And balancing those two things can be really hard. But I do think you have to be able to separate that. The other thing I would say is that, and again, we'll talk about this more later, but it is not always about your art. And so approaching a rejection with the mindset of, that person thought my work sucked, I'm just going to say you're wrong. Like, maybe that is one thing that came into play in the jury process, and maybe there's an opportunity for learning, but it's not so cut and dry. It's not so black and white. And if that's the mindset, that's the thing that you think when you receive a rejection, I would really encourage you to listen to this whole conversation first, and then to really develop practices to make that just not even a thing you think about.
So, if it's not just about the art, what else is rejection about? What else can it be about?
Yeah, so many things. So one of the big lessons I learned as the on the back end doing these things is, we did this big show called Wildflowers, and we had three jurors, and I entered the show so I could not see how the jurors scored the work, which jurors scored what work, but because I was helping with the back end, I could see the general scores. And it was fascinating to me because some of my personal favorite artists scored the lowest. They did not get in. These three jurors, just, it wasn't the work that appealed to them. And these are artists who have work hanging in museums, and they are artists who I would be honored to have their work in my home. They are talented, skilled artists, but their work did not appeal to these jurors. And so anytime you're dealing with art at all, there's always a perspective and an opinion coming from the juror, coming from the viewer, anybody looking at your work. That's always going to be a part of it. And yes, some people have cultivated and refined their sensibilities for understanding higher quality art, but even at that, there's still opinion there. And so while like the work may not have appealed to one juror, it could have been a different juror and it would have got best in show. You just don't know.
Even though you just kind of described the work wasn't for them, so that was work centric. What you're saying is the other factor is not the work, the jurors' taste, biases, what they had for lunch, if they had lunch, if they, what they're going through at the time. So very personal stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that we frequently see artists making mistakes is in their application, just really common mistakes. We've had artists not finish their application, not submit certain information, to have links that are broken, bios and statements that either don't go together, aren't well written, or don't seem to speak to the work at all. We've seen artists submit poor images, unfinished images. There's so many things that artists have made mistakes on in their application. And if another good skill for you to take away from this conversation is learning how to think like the person on the back end. Because if you're a juror and you're logged into whatever the platform is, and you have 300, 500, 1,000, 2,000 works to look at, what is the easiest thing you can do to reduce that? Oh, that person's missing information, they're gone. Blurry photo, they're gone. And it's an easy way to reduce. So when you are applying for a show, for a grant, for anything, you have to ensure that you are standing out. Because if there are a lot of applicants, the juror is not going to have the time to go through and find that missing information. And that can make such a huge difference. So double checking all your application stuff and making sure that everything feels cohesive and high quality and it makes sense together is going to help make your application stand out. But we see a lot of artists get rejections because of mistakes.
And they should, because
Mhm.
it's part of being a professional, and there are just too many artists out there to make those kinds of amateur mistakes. And what I like to say is nobody's going to fill in the information for you. Like if your photo's bad, they're not going to go, oh yeah, but I know that it really looks this way in real life, because they don't
Mhm.
have that. And that's why images are, I'm guessing that's probably the first thing they weed out. And then it might go down to the written material. That's what I would do. I would look at the
Yeah.
images first, and yeah.
Yeah, it depends on the juror for
Yeah.
sure.
And the
Yeah.
way the process sets it up. I've only juried a few shows, but
Mhm.
they're all set up differently as to how that works. Okay. What else? I kind of interrupted you there.
Oh, that's okay. I was also going to say what you're communicating when you submit a poor application is I am not trustworthy should I get into this show.
Yes.
And that is what I think as an event organizer, because the burden of putting on an event is huge. And if you're submitting an application that does not show that you're a professional, my first thought is going to be this person can't even finish filling this out. How can I trust them to read a contract, to follow a contract, and to get their work to me in the way that it's supposed to be? And early on, we learned that. Like, we've seen that actually play out of like, oh, we made a concession for something. And then guess what? That artist is the artist that is the problem child. And so the more I do this, the less inclined I am to even like consider those mistakes in shows, even for the emerging artists. Like, you need to have your stuff together.
Yeah. No one has time for that.
So the third thing that can come up is space considerations. So your work might have been stellar, your application might have been beautiful, and when that juror starts looking at how much space they can actually use, or the curator, whoever it is, looking at how much space is actually available, your work might get booted out because maybe it just happened to be on the lower side of a high score. Oftentimes, what we've seen happen is like several big pieces get in, scoring at the top. Well, guess what? That takes up a lot of wall space. And so your work might have been great and would have been beautiful for the show, but it didn't fit. And we've also seen artists actually not read through the prospectus and submit work that's too big, that like bigger than the requirements, and beautiful work that I wanted so bad to include. I can picture it in my head still, but I'm like, oh no, it's too big. So making sure to read whatever those requirements are, that's another big thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So have we gone through the back end things for people? Have we gone through all of the points about the factors that go into whether or not your work is accepted?
I think those are the main factors for things that don't have to do with your work, but you might still get a rejection.
Yes, let's go there.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
still might get a rejection. And I think one of the things that really drives my clients crazy the most is that they don't know why they were rejected. They don't, or they just never hear, or the rejection comes too late, or not as promised. And I don't know, like, you as a leader of one single organization can't solve that problem, but what do you tell artists who say, how do I know why it wasn't accepted?
Yeah, so it's a hard one. And what I would say is if the application, the prospectus does not say we will be giving you personalized feedback, it's not something that you can necessarily expect and certainly not something you can demand. We had, for example, when we did the curatorial committee for women's work, we had over 1,000 images submitted, and it would be impossible for us to get. Many of these jurors are volunteering their time often for organizations like ours, and giving out personal feedback can be very touchy, and it's very hard to give. I do give a lot of personal feedback, but it's a very vulnerable thing to do for both the artist and for the person giving the feedback. And so it's not a small request. So, what I would say is if they did not say that they will provide that, you can still send a follow up email, making sure that it is kind and professional and saying, thank you for your time. Is there any way that I could get some feedback on why I was rejected? And then if they say, yes, here it is, or they may say no. And whatever their response is, you need to just thank them for their time. If you get a no, we were not able to do that. Okay, thank you so much for your time. I'll try again next year. If they send feedback to you, for just trust me on this, do not argue with them. Like, it does not matter if your opinion it aligns with theirs. Remember that it was a generous gift for that feedback to be given. It is one person's opinion, and often when you wait and sit with it, even if you don't take something from it right away, you'll think about it later and come back and be like, oh, I can see what they said. But I don't care if you think that it was the dumbest thing you've ever heard in your life. You say, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate that. And you stop communicating with them. It looks so bad when you ask for feedback and then you argue with it. And that's also another reason many people don't give it, because so many people get this emotional response and don't respond professionally.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine. And yes, I can imagine. It's so easy to do that on email, like just send off that quick, like you were saying, the angry letter or the argumentative letter or whatever. It's just so easy to hit the send button. So like maybe write the argument in a document and never send it. That would
Right.
make a
I
bit.
would say write it on paper so there's no chance of it accidentally getting sent.
Well, if you put it in a document, it doesn't, you'd have to
Yeah,
actually
that's
attach
true.
it
Yeah,
to
a document,
something.
yeah.
But I have written some of those letters myself and never sent them. And they feel
Yeah.
really good to write them. Um, you can have a whole ritual around burning them if you want.
Right, yeah.
So the rejections do happen, and we want the emotional intelligence to come through, which requires incredible discipline. It requires you to stop with the emotion and really observe something almost as an outsider
Mhm.
to do that. And then you talked about mindfulness. So say more about that, how that comes into this process.
Yeah, so when you receive that rejection, being mindful, all the things that we've talked about, honestly. So being mindful of that emotion, and then being mindful of it's not necessarily me. I may have something to learn about this, and developing a more thoughtful practice towards receiving those rejections. I know some artists celebrate their rejections because it means that they tried. I got 2 rejections this year from 2 shows that were stretches for me that I really would have loved to be in. Am I bummed out about it? For sure. Am I going to like let it stop my career? Or no, you know what? I say, what do I have to do to make my work good enough to be there? And even if it's good enough now, for whatever reason it didn't, what can I do to make it even better for next time? So how can you challenge yourself to grow and to lean into it and to let those emotions not control you so that you can continue to be productive? This is kind of a weird little trick, but it's something that has worked for me. And I don't necessarily like physically do this, but more of a visualization. But sometimes when I'm dealing with something challenging and feeling with big emotions, I imagine that I'm like holding this little emotion in my hand and I say, what are you trying to tell me? Because our emotions are trying to tell us something. And it might be that when we converse with that emotion, we realize, oh, actually, what I need to learn here is that I'm being triggered or I am being whatever. But sometimes it might be that we learn, oh, what this emotion is trying to tell me is that I'm feeling sensitive about the composition of my work because I realize deep down it's not strong enough and I need to work on that. And so, being able to really see what is it that I can take from this and what is it that I can help to use it to help to grow and encourage me. Use it as just, how some people, like, if you tell them you can't do that, they're going to go do it just to prove you wrong. Let it be that. Like, let a rejection be that. But also, a story I like to share is that one year I got rejected from every single thing I applied to. And I felt that I still feel that I had very strong applications for all those. And the last rejection I got that year, I cried. I did. The rest of them, I was like, whatever, it's fine. It's fine. I'm going to keep going. It was so many. I just cried and I went for a walk and I felt self-conscious about my work. And then the next day I got back in the studio and I got back to work and I did it again. And the next year was the most successful I ever had. You just don't know. And I know artists have talked about, getting rejected one year with a piece, applying again with the same piece, getting in and selling the work, so there's just so many variables in reminding yourself it is not all about you. Tell your ego, shh, and go and do the work.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it does require an incredible amount of emotional intelligence, of not getting caught up in the emotions. I love this. What are you trying to tell me? Rather than what do I learn from this? How is this a growth experience? Because what that does is it it makes it less personal. What are you trying to tell me? Not what should I
Mhm.
have done differently, but what are you trying to tell
Mhm.
me? I really like that.
Yeah.
Very nice. As the organizer or on the back end of some of these things, what have you seen artists do that it does not come off in the best light after they receive a rejection?
Yeah. So typically it's those responses that come out of that ego and that at first initial emotional response. One thing to always keep in mind is that email, you don't get tone. You and I talking, we can say the same exact thing with 2 different tones and it will sound totally different. One way is rude, one way is like bossy, one way super nice, right? And we don't get that in email. So always approach an email, especially if you're feeling a big emotion, with extra care about how it's worded. And even if you think there could be some question about your tone in the email, I would still even say, I feel like this email sounds snarky. It's just the text. I can't figure out how to say this where it doesn't feel snarky. This is truly a genuine question. Because what happens, luckily not a lot, but we see it enough that it is a problem, is that artists will receive a rejection and they blame everybody but themselves. They take it very personally. And then they do things like send a rude email, they send demanding emails, they badmouth the show or the organization, to everybody. And they start, sometimes we've even seen artists lie about why they were rejected because they were so unable to accept the feedback that they were given. And all of those things, like, you might be thinking it makes you look better, like, oh, it's not my fault, I'm good enough to be in that show and it's their fault. it does not only does it not make you look better, it makes you look super unprofessional to anybody watching. It creates a reputation of negativity for you and your career, which will ultimately affect like even your peers. Your peers don't want to be around people who are constantly being negative and bad mouthing, because if you're going to badmouth one person or one organization, who's to say you're not going to do it to another? And so it erodes trust. And one of the biggest things this can hold you back, and I'm not going to go into any sort of detail about this, but we have worked with organizations where an artist, we were going to accept them in, or we were maybe like not sure and we wanted their feedback. And the organization said, we have worked with that artist and they are a nightmare to work with and we don't want to accept them. And so your reputation can literally make you have a rejection. Also, whenever you send emails, like even if it's before you apply, if it's about the show itself, like maybe you're like, hey, I'm trying to apply and I'm having this problem, or afterwards when you've received a rejection, being very kind and generous and not taking an approach of blaming anyone. Because what we see a lot of times is people get really flustered and then they just send this like very like it's just like I don't it's very bizarre to me, but it's like this message of everything is wrong with the way that this is done. This is the hardest thing I've ever used and it's not working and I demand that you help me right now. Well, on truly 99.9% of the time it's a user error. And so when you come in like I can't think of a better term, but like come in guns blazing, ready to like fight with somebody, and then you find out, oh, actually I did forget to put that on my application, or oh, my computer is doing something, or oh, whatever, it is going to feel really silly and then it looks bad because what you've done is you've come out, you've been super rude, you have not showed yourself as a team player, and then ultimately it came back to you. So keep in mind that you might think that you're in the right, but it's going to be really embarrassing if you are rude and then it turns out that you missed something. So always, always, always approach things with generosity and with kindness and with the knowledge that you might be missing something. And please, like, remember that whoever you're talking to on the other side is doing a lot of work. They have the back end of hosting anything is an incredibly large task that if you've not been a part of it, there's no way for you to understand it. So approaching those emails as these are people working hard to do this, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, I will say sometimes we do encounter situations where an organization isn't doing the right thing, a show didn't do the right thing, whatever. And I still will tell people, even at that, you need to ensure that all of your communication is professional, because the way that I see it is, what if this was ever published online? How does it look? Do they look bad or do I look bad? And this kind of feels a little off topic, but I just watched this show. It was called like Owning Manhattan or something. It's on Netflix. And I thought it was just a real estate show that was going to show pretty houses. And I normally don't watch dramatic like reality TV, but I just got sucked in because I didn't know that's what it was. But if you watch that show, you can see so many times where somebody was in the wrong, but because of the way that the person who was like kind of more in the right behaved, they ended up looking bad. So just always keep it professional. Always double check. Have somebody check your messages, or you can write your mean message and go into like AI chat GPT and say, this is the issue, make this message nice, and then you've gotten that mean email out, and then you have something nice and professional and you can send that instead. But just don't start that reputation with yourself. It will hold you back.
And don't ever start the mean email in the email inbox, because
Right.
then
Yeah.
you never know where that goes. But I think the
Yeah.
lesson there's a couple lessons uh, that you didn't say outright, but one is that tearing other people down is never going to lift you up.
Mm-mm.
Like
Never.
being pissed off and making and pointing the finger and saying that other people are wrong and bad people does not make you look any better. It always makes you look worse in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And that the art world everyone talks about how small the art world was like in the 60s, 50s and 60s. It's even smaller now because everyone can talk to everyone else instantly. And
Yeah.
so
And if
even,
you're in a niche,
yeah,
it's tiny.
it's even smaller. Yeah, yeah. The reputations get around. Gallerists talk to one another. They don't just, they have their own gallery organizations. They know the artists they don't want to work with well in
Mm-hmm.
advance. And same as with museum curators and so forth. All right. Have we missed anything?
I think those are the big things that I like to talk about. I just would like to remind everyone again, you're in good company. Please don't let it stop you, because if you have to go see a therapist, like, therapists are great. Do whatever you have to do. If you're passionate about this, if you want to do it, then find the ways to deal with that rejection in healthy ways. Celebrate the rejections and just go out there and keep doing it and keep coming back to it, because that's what it takes. And it does not happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a year. It takes time to build it up, and you can't give up.
I love that. And that would be a perfect place to end, except that you just mentioned something that I think is really important. And that is that some people, I'm one of these people, deal with things by talking it out. And
Mm-hmm.
so, while you might go inside yourself and write the letter and so forth, sometimes it just helps to talk out, whether it's with the therapist or another artist or another, like your spouse or whatever. Sometimes that just really helps to calming down. Actually, and you mentioned this, whenever I write a tricky letter, it's usually to a client or potential client. I always have my husband look over it, and he does the same with
Mm-hmm.
me. We can both temper
Yeah.
each other. They're never mean, but I just want to make sure there's nothing that can be
Right.
misconstrued.
For sure. It's
Yeah.
so worth taking that moment, because on the other hand of having a bad reputation, if you have a great reputation where people love working with you and they think you're a delight, you're going to get so many more opportunities. You're always going to be in that person's head when something comes up. And that's really what you want to happen. So, but I did want to also say with the therapy, it's so funny because I just did a podcast the other day and talked about this too, but find the therapist that is good for you. It's okay to hire and fire who you need. But for me, I want somebody who gives me tools and gives me advice and helps, is going to hold me accountable, because that's what helps me to grow. So everybody's different, but don't be afraid to try a few people out. And really, I think we should all be in therapy, because we all have things that we can. It's just like a best friend who's not going to get annoyed because you're griping. And then they are going to also have this really great advice to help you. And then you don't have to take that always to your best friend. And so it is a valuable resource, and ultimately helps you in all areas of your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Megan, before you go, what's coming up next for you or Cowgirl Artists of America?
Yeah, so for both, it's women's work, which I am excited about. If you don't know about it, you can Google Cowgirl Artists of America
Oh no,
and go to the.
we'll put it everything in the show
Oh, right.
notes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
yeah, check that out. It is a really cool show, and it is one of a kind. I don't know of any other show who's done this the way that we're doing it. It's going to be every year, and I am thrilled about it. And the piece I did for the show, I am very excited about, because it's the fruition of me pushing my work in new ways, and I'm really excited to see that growth coming out.
Okay. And I'm not sure if that will open before or after this episode airs, but when does it open and how long does it last?
Yeah, opening weekend is August 2nd through 3rd in Trinidad, Colorado, and the show closes at the end of September. And we will have all kinds of online things for people to view, like in our Instagram and things like that too.
Awesome. Megan, thank you so much. You're going to help a lot of people out with this episode.
I hope so. I want to see more art, so keep it coming. Thank you, Alyson.
Hey, thanks so much for watching this video episode of the Art Biz podcast. If you prefer to listen, you can always find the Art Biz wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also subscribe at artbizsuccess.com, and I'll let you know whenever it's updated. If you want to read the show notes for this episode, get links to things mentioned, or links to anything else, check out the description below. Thanks for watching and allowing me to be part of your artist's journey.